Welcome to Eye on Literature. This is Michael Minassian podcasting from Broward Community College in Broward County, Florida. This is actually part 2 of my conversation with novelist Christine Kling. In this part of the podcast, we're going to talk about the publishing business. So, Christine, let's talk a little bit about the publishing aspect of being a writer. How did your first novel get published?
It took me, first of all, 7 years to write that novel.
7 years. Wow.
Right. So I had attended graduate school at Florida International University, FIU, and my profs were published writers there. So I didn't start the novel until I finished graduate school. And so 7 years later, I went down to FIU. I hadn't really stayed in touch during that time. And I cornered 2 of my professors as I had checked their schedules and knew that they were coming off of night classes, 9 o'clock. And I said, "Hi, remember me? I finished a book, and what do I do now?" And they really, in the time that I had been in the MFA and creative writing program, they had not done a lot of classwork on how to get published.
Right.
And I didn't really know. They each recommended an agent. Neither was their current agent. They were agents that they'd had earlier, and they told me that you can go to the library or the bookstore and you can get books on agents.
Right.
I know much more about it now than I did then. But I sent 2 query letters to the 2 names that they had given me, recommended that I sent. And I was really kind of hoping that they would just pick up the phone and call and make a recommendation and that it would be that easy.
Right.
And I discovered it doesn't work that way at all. So I did at the end of my conversation say, "Is it okay with you guys if I use your name saying that I was a student in your class?" And they said, "Yes, that's fine." So I wrote those 2 agents, and both of them came back and wanted to see the first 50 pages of the manuscript. But the first one who contacted me, wanted an exclusive arrangement. So when the second one actually telephoned me, and I said, "I've already sent it as an exclusive to this other agent, but if they reject me, I will come back to you." And as it turned out, they didn't reject me. So it's an extremely unusual story. Almost nobody gets an agent on their very first query letter. But it did happen to me, and it was just, I think, a combination of things. This particular agency had represented quite a number of Florida authors, including Vicki Hendricks, right here at BCC. Had represented the professors at FIU as well as quite a few other Florida authors. So they had an interest in Florida fiction. That's one thing. Now, looking back, I just kind of fell into that. But I know that to get an agent, you should look and make sure that your agent publishes the type of work that you write, is interested in that genre, and publishes, and not publishes, but is representing people who are very similar to you. I found that by accident, by asking for these profs for a recommendation. But that's what it takes. And then that agent actually had me revise and rewrite this manuscript, this 365-page manuscript, at least 4 times.
Wow.
And that took 9 months of revision with my agent. They started then submitting it to publishers, and the manuscript was rejected 17 times before it finally found a home with a publisher. And it was 2 publishers at the same time who, what happened was, I think, I'm published by Ballantine, and I think it was Ballantine said yes, they would publish, and they made an offer. And an agent sends the manuscript out to several publishers at the same time, hoping to kind of get an auction going or something. And then St. Martin's said, "Well, yeah, we're interested too," and they said, "We're going to offer $5,000 more on what is called an advance against royalties." And so I had to make a decision, this one or this one, and this one is a little bit more, this one will significantly more money. And I went back and forth. I asked writer friends recommendations, and I eventually called up my agent and said, "You know, this one is offering less money, But from my research, I like them better.
Mhm.
They publish fewer mysteries, and I think I'll get more attention there. This other one seems to publish 20 or 30 mysteries a quarter,
Right.
and they don't give very much attention to them.
Mhm.
So she said, fine. As soon as I hung up, my agent got a phone call from the publisher, and he asked, has she made a decision yet? And that's when you know you have a good agent. She said, no, she hasn't decided yet.
Mhm.
And they said, okay, we'll match the offer with the other guy. So I lucked out.
That's great. Good.
So that's how it happened, and I've been with Valentine ever since.
It sounds like you were very lucky in getting an agent so quickly. Usually it takes people a long time, but I guess since you knew your professors, at least got some recommendations from professors, it was a little bit easier. You didn't have to go through looking through the literary marketplace, which is where agents will sometimes send you if you approach an agent and say, well, it's not right for us, look at the literary marketplace. And that's kind of a daunting task, I think, to look at descriptions, little paragraphs, and try to figure out who you are suited for.
Well, today there is a really interesting online entity called Publishers Marketplace. And Publishers Marketplace is a subscription service. It's kind of like Publishers Weekly, the magazine, gone digital. And it has databases that you can search, and most of the agents are now on Publishers Marketplace. It's a $20 a month subscription, and you don't have to sign up for any more than 1 month. And,
I see.
and it's a really good, I think it's going to make the book-based agent searches out of date.
Right.
Pretty much everybody's moving over to databases. And the second thing is agents are starting blogs. There are so many agent blogs now. And you can usually, once you find one agent blog, they all list each other's blogs on the side. And you learn a lot by reading agent blogs today about what's happening in the business.
Right. No, good advice. Okay, great. So how were you treated by the publishing company? Look, actually, before we get to that, a related question, I think, is you said that the agent had you do some rewrites. Once you had a publishing company, did they assign an editor, and what did that editor ask of you?
Well, that's a really good question, because many agents today are acting like editors, and they're having the writers do a lot, and many agents today are former editors. And they have you do very often quite a lot of rewriting. But as soon as you get assigned an editor, all of this is somewhat subjective. So now it's your new editor's take. My first editor at Valentine was Tracy Brown, and he had me do 2 revisions of Surface Tension. And from the time I said yes on the telephone and that happened, my book was not published for 22 months.
Wow.
It was 22 months from that yes until the book was on the shelves. And a good year of that was revision and rewriting. And then there's a whole, when the book goes into production and they begin sending you what the cover art is going to look like, and they get all into the typography of it and the design of the pages, and it's quite interesting. But the editor works with you through all of that. Now the editor, I was surprised, because as a teacher, I have learned to be a better teacher from how my editors have edited me, because the editors ask these deep questions about the structure of the book. And you revise and rewrite for your editor, and then they send it to the copy editor. And the copy editor is the one who does the real line edits on this will sound better, this is better grammar. I found out that I was not born with the comma gene, and that actually dashes and hyphens are my worst. But in spite of the fact that I'm an English teacher and I can teach the rules, I don't always follow the rules. And copy editors, we don't love them. They're necessary, but yeah.
Okay, so what was it like then when the novel was published? Did you have a close relationship with the publishing company? and your editor, or was it strictly business and now the book is published and go away and write another book and come back when you're done?
Well, it's a little bit of both,
Mm-hmm.
really. My first editor, Tracy Brown, ended up only editing that first book.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened to me is the story of what happens to a lot of authors in this very changing corporate marketplace. People come and people go. Well, the person who says, who does what we call picks this writer out of the slush pile.
Mm-hmm.
This person says, I think this book merits publishing, I'm going to choose this book. And his reputation is riding on that. He has a lot invested in that book.
Right.
And Tracy worked very hard on things like that we call subsidiary rights. So during that time, he got it into large print edition,
Mm-hmm.
he got the audio books. We retained the international rights, so the German and the Dutch and the British publications were sold by my agent. But my in-house editor really pushed to get the book as a first alternate with the Mystery Guild Book Club
Mm-hmm.
and things like that. Well, I had a very close relationship with Tracy. I'd never been to New York City,
Mm-hmm.
and I flew up for the very first time, and I was the typical tourist walking around trying to find the Random House building, you know.
Looking
like,
up.
looking up. And I finally found the building, and he had a glassed-in corner office overlooking Times Square.
Oh, nice.
And I just thought I just died and gone to heaven, you know. I was being treated, introduced around the office and all of this, and
Mm-hmm.
he had stacks of books, and we just clicked. We
Mhm.
had kids the same age, and everything was great. Well, a year later, Ballantine merged with another line that was called Little Random. And because Ballantine was the takeover group, Little Random was no more and
Right.
had become a part of them. I called up Tracy and I said, "Are you okay?" And he said, "Yeah, we're the ones who took over them. I'll be okay."
Mhm.
And 2 weeks later, he was gone.
Oh, no.
And I was assigned to a young fellow, and very young fellow, who
Mhm.
is my new editor, Mark Tavani. And at the time, when I first met him, he was not yet 30 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt like telling him it was past his bedtime. I found out he was brilliant. But again, this is what happens, when this happens to a writer, you call it being orphaned.
Mm-hmm.
And you get assigned to a new editor. And that editor doesn't necessarily have the same amount invested in your career.
Right, right.
He has been assigned to you.
Mm-hmm.
Now, fortunately, Mark's pretty brilliant, I discovered, in
Mhm.
spite of his youth. And we've worked well together. But it's can be very tough to writers when you get orphaned, and you may not get the same amount of attention. And the other thing to consider is that your first book is kind of like your rookie card.
Mm-hmm.
When a new baseball player is on the scene, you don't know if he's going to end his career in the Hall of Fame.
Right, right.
And so a lot of people buy all those rookie cards.
Mhm.
Same thing with first novels. The first novels of Sue Grafton, who writes the A is for Alibi,
Right,
B's for
right, right.
Burglar series.
Yeah.
Her first novel had a print run of something like 1,500 copies, and today they sell for over $1,000, the
Wow.
first edition
First
of her
editions,
first novel.
yeah.
And a lot of people buy those.
Mm-hmm.
So your first novel gets a lot more attention. You're a
Mm.
debut author.
Mm-hmm.
And my publisher sent me on a little book tour around Florida, and they put me up in hotels, and I got to go to the restaurant and just sign. That was very cool. That didn't necessarily continue, however. But they put emails out about me. They didn't spend a lot on print advertising.
Mm-hmm.
They do, and they've continued, though, to spend on something that is called co-op. And co-op is when the bookstore actually has the publishing house pay to put the books on a certain shelf.
Mm.
So every time my hardcovers come out, Ballantine has paid co-op money for those books to be on the new in mystery fiction or new in fiction shelf, front cover out. And I would actually rather have that than an ad in USA Today, because that's
Right.
going to be in all the Barnes and Nobles all over the United
Yeah.
States.
So the publishers actually have to buy that space.
Yes.
It's kind of like when you walk into the cereal aisle and special K is at eye level.
Exactly.
It's not an accident.
No, and when you walk on the end, those end caps, they call them, whether it's in
Right.
the supermarket or
Right.
the bookstore.
Bookstores, yeah.
Somebody's paid to
That's-
be on that
so
end
it's
cap.
paid. So it sounds like, well, of course, we know it's a business, but it sounds like it's a very, very dollar-driven business.
It is dollar-driven, and yet, you know what I've found? These editors, the people who choose the books, they don't make the $1 million that some of the writers, not very many, a lot of people don't realize how few writers make a lot of money.
Right.
But the editors, none of them make those big bucks. They're in it because they love books.
Mm.
And that has been kind of an eye-opener to me. In the beginning, when you want to get published, you think, in a way, they're sort of the enemy, that they're trying not to publish books. They're not. They're trying to find good books. They're desperate for good books. The problem is, it's so hard to write good books. And I'm at a point now in my career where my books I have not been the next Dan Brown, unfortunately. I have not written the next Da Vinci Code. And that's what they're looking for. And my books have been kind of on a plateau. I haven't zoomed up to the bestseller list. And I want to be there.
Of course,
so
right.
now I'm trying to write with my new book something that is bigger, bolder, bigger scale, something that will sell more books. And how do you have those kind of really original ideas that are going to sell? I have tons of ideas, but not necessarily the next pet rock kind of idea.
Right. That idea that all writers are looking for, I think.
Right.
Oh, okay. Do you think that publishing is more or less friendly now to writers? Of course, this has been going on a long time. The publishing business is consolidating, constantly consolidating. When there are fewer publishing houses, does that make it more difficult for writers?
Yes, I think it does, because Ballantine is part of Random House, and Random House now owns something, gosh, I don't know, 30 imprints. Crown is Random House. You can just go on and on. Doubleday, all of these different companies that used to be independent companies are all Random House. Now, it's still possible, if you want to get published, for your agent to send a book to Crown, to Random House, to Ballantine, to all the different imprints. The editors are different. However, they all work in the same building. They all talk around the water cooler. And it would only take someone to say, oh, I read Christine Kling's new book today over in the lunchroom, and I didn't like it. And the next time it hits everybody else who is sitting at that table, they're gonna not bother. They work in the same building. They're the same company in the end. And Random House is actually owned by Bertelsmann, which is a German multinational corporation. And when Bertelsmann's bottom line is lacking, people start getting hacked off at the publishing house because they need to make more money. It's time to let go of these people. So it's so cutthroat today. Actually, they are publishing more books today than ever before. There are something like over 1,000 mystery titles, new mystery fiction titles published a year. It's extraordinary, the huge number of titles being published today. But they are not being given the same attention, the same advertising campaign. And I walk into a Barnes & Noble and I look at the 250,000 books in that store. And I know that maybe one of my books, like this book, will be in amongst 100,000 books, spine out. What are the odds that when Michael walks into that store, he's going to find my book down on the bottom shelf and pull it out and buy it and read it? So and if you aren't successful...
Unless I'm looking for it.
Unless you're looking for it.
Yeah, if you're just looking and browsing, then it's very difficult to grab somebody's attention.
And the publishers are looking, when they're looking to publish the next book, they're looking for the book that will get enough word of mouth. Everybody who reads it will go and say over the water cooler to their friend, oh, I just finished this book and you've got to read it. And so the level of kind of extraordinariness of books is really up today.
All right.
A book that would have been published 20 years ago won't get published today. It has to have, and I'm not sure that's good for literature. People are, I read sometimes what's been bought recently, and it's like something out of the National Enquirer. You know, the two-headed man is caught on a raft with a tiger at sea, and
Right.
he writes his memoir. You know,
A bad Hollywood pitch for a movie, right?
yeah, and you know, it has to be so outlandish and so wild today. And books are in competition with the internet. I mean, you and I are both big readers, and a huge amount of our time is now spent reading on screen.
Yeah, definitely.
Not in print. And so books are in competition against so much else: television, movies, internet. And that is making it harder and harder. Even though they're publishing more books than ever before, people have so many more choices with their time. And it's tougher to get published, it's tougher to get read.
Right. But books don't seem to be suffering the same fate as CDs, for example. CDs are becoming obsolete not because of technology, but because of the delivery system.
Yes.
Do you think books will become obsolete like that in any way?
I don't know. My neighbor last night just brought home a Kindle and was showing it around, the new digital book reader.
Oh, the Amazon. Right.
And it's very cool. I was lusting after one, this little electronic device. Now, I live on a little tiny boat, and on my boat, my books make it so that my boat heels over all the time because my bookshelf is on one side.
Right.
And this little electronic device can hold 200 books. So I don't think the Kindle is it yet. It's not an elegant thing that is going to make people give up that joy of paper.
Right.
But I think it will happen. I think that someone will invent an electronic device. And I think it'll still be print. It won't be audiobooks. Audiobooks I enjoy audiobooks, but I think print will always be with us.
Right.
But paper may go by the wayside.
Well, I have a friend who, actually someone at this campus at BCC who has a Sony reader, and I think the bloom of first love has gone because he used it a lot when he first got it, and now it's collecting dust with his other older electronic equipment. So
Right.
I don't know.
Well,
But-
you know, there were a lot of listening devices before the iPod.
Right.
And I think that most people's old, what did we call the old CD players?
The Walkman.
The Walkman.
I still call my iPad a Walkman sometimes.
The Walkmans are collecting dust.
Yeah.
And I think it's going to take somebody coming up with an iPod-type design to make digital books a reality.
Right. But I think you're right. There's something about picking up a book and holding it in your hand, and the paper and the tactile sort of relationship that you have with the book. And then when you finish it, you know, it's like a treasured little object
Yes.
that you want to, save and hold on to, maybe pass on to a friend,
Yes.
and hope they give it back. You hear that? You know who you are. Okay, so, well, I think that about covers it for us, unless there's anything else that you'd like to say about the publishing business or any advice you have for aspiring writers.
Well, I would like to say just a couple things, because I think it's interesting for people about the money side. And I think that they should know. For example, a hardcover book like this, Surface Tension, when it came out in hardcover, sold for $24.
Right.
And I mentioned writers getting paid with an advance against royalties. Writers get a royalty. And this book that sells for essentially $24, I get 10% of this.
Okay.
So I get $2.40. And when I say that to students, they're like, oh man, I wouldn't write a book. That's all you get? $2.40? You gotta be kidding. But then I try to remind them that it's an economy of scale here that we're dealing with. And that 100 books is $240, and 1,000 books, and we would hope to sell 100,000 books.
Sure.
And then it would be over $200,000. And that's the dream. You get a very small percentage of each book, but you make money if lots of books sell. And that's how writers get paid. Now, of that $2.40, I still have to pay my agent 15%. So I don't even get that. And then I have to pay the taxes to the government, and I have to Social Security.
You have to pay the advance back as well, or is that part of it?
The advance is an advance against your royalties. So let's just use some imaginary numbers here.
Okay.
Let's say a writer gets an advance of $10,000 against royalties, and the book sells for $25. I'm an English person, not math, so I have to make this easy.
We're gonna just nod here.
Yes. So $25, then if that person sells 100 books, it's $250 at $2.50 a book.
Okay.
So to make $10,000, they're gonna have to sell something like 4,000 books to make the $10,000 advance back. Now they've sold 4,000 books. Now, let's say it's my book, let's say it's Faulty Intelligence that I got this $10,000 advance on, and I go on Oprah, and Oprah says, buy Christine's book.
Right.
Suddenly, Ballantine is going to run back and fire up the presses and publish a whole bunch more. They may have only done 4,000 copies on that print run because they knew that I only had a $10,000 advance. But now that they're going to be selling way more beyond that, I would start getting royalty checks in addition to that advance against royalties.
I see. Okay.
But let's say the other situation had happened, that they read Faulty Intelligence and they said, oh, this is wonderful, and we're going to pay her a $100,000 advance. And it only ever sold 4,000 copies. And only ever made for me $10,000. I don't have to give that $90,000 back. So the publishing companies are taking a big risk on the authors. They're paying them in advance against royalties, hoping that that book will sell whatever that advance is. And in the event it sells more than that, the writer would get more beyond that.
I see. Okay.
So it's an interesting sort of gamble. They lose a lot of money on a lot of authors. And on other authors, it's a big payday. Because it doesn't cost very much to print more books. The first few are very expensive. But when they can print more. So, Oprah, yeah, I'm ready, anytime.
You heard that right here, Oprah, don't forget. Okay, great. All right, well, I think that wraps it up for us again today. And this is the end of the podcast. I want to thank Christine really for sharing a lot of time and great information with us. I forgot to thank you at the end of the last podcast. I'm sorry about that. But a double thank you, as my friend says when he misses a stop sign. I'll stop twice next time. So that's what I'm doing. I'm thanking you twice this time. It's the end of the podcast, and this is Professor Michael Minassian, podcasting from Broward Community College in Broward County, Florida, reminding you to keep your eye on literature.